Good evening, and welcome back to the Case Files. Today, we delve into a disaster that exposes the terrifying fragility of modern aviation, where a single instantaneous event, a collision with a tiny migrating bird, could trigger a cascading failure that laid bare systemic negligence at every level of safety oversight. This is the story of Jeju Air Flight 2216. As always, my name is Cody. I run this channel with my partner Katie. Welcome back to the Case Files Minds of Madness. A reminder, if you do find today's video interesting and informative, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories told by yours truly. Now grab a snack and a blanket and let's dive in. It was the morning of Sunday, December 29, 2024. The sky above Jeju Island, South Korea's subtropical paradise, was giving way to the cold, damp air of the mainland. A routine flight, a Boeing 737-800 operated by Jeju Air, stood ready on the tarmac. Its destination, Muan International Airport in South Jeolla Province. A journey of barely an hour crossing a narrow strait of water. On board were 175 passengers and 6 crew members, 181 lives, each with a destination, a family, a story waiting to continue. The pilots were seasoned, the aircraft maintained, and the weather, while foggy near Muan, was within safe operating limits. But aviation safety is built on layers like an onion, designed so that if one layer fails, the next catches the fall. On this particular morning, a perfect storm of failures, mechanical, regulatory, and human, was about to align with a rigid, immovable object placed where it should never have been. And when the music stopped, all those layers failed simultaneously. Flight 2216 departed on time. Its takeoff was unremarkable. Its cruise smooth. For most of the flight, the passengers were simply heading home or starting a vacation. The pilots were focused on the approach into Muan. It wasn't until the final minutes, during the descent through the low-hanging coastal mist, that the silence of routine was violently shattered. At that moment, Flight 2216 was no longer an airliner. It was a 70-ton, powerless glider, hurtling towards an airport that, unknown to anyone on board, held a deadly, concealed trap. The first piece of the puzzle, and the event that set the entire chain reaction in motion, was microscopic in the context of a modern jet, but catastrophic in its consequence: a bird strike. The investigation, spearheaded by the Air Accident Investigation and Railway Accident Investigation Board, or ARIB, meticulously analyzed the wreckage. The findings were chillingly specific. Feathers and blood confirmed the initiating event was a collision with a flock of Baikal teal. The Baikal teal is a medium-sized duck migrating through the region during the winter months. A single bird strike, while serious, is often manageable. But the physics of a large flock, ingested by both powerful turbofan engines simultaneously at high speed during a critical phase of flight, is entirely different. The fan blades, spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, were instantly shattered and compromised. The engine suffered a rapid and complete failure. The cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, and the flight data recorder, the FDR, the black boxes, are the impartial witnesses to the final moments. But even they failed. At precisely 8:58:50 a.m., the CVR and FDR stopped recording. The reason was stark: a dual-engine flameout combined with a total loss of all electrical power. Think of a modern airliner. Every critical function, navigation, hydraulics, flight controls, even the ability to communicate, relies on electrical generation, which is typically powered by the engines. When both engines failed simultaneously due to the ingestion of the Baikal teal, the power grid went dark. The CVR wasn't recording a high-stakes conversation, it was recording silence, because it simply ceased to function. This immediate, complete power failure set off a chain of catastrophic mechanical failures that stripped the crew of essential tools for survival. First, the bird strike had not only damaged the engines, but it also compromised the hydraulic system controlling the landing gear. With no hydraulic pressure and likely without the electrical power needed for the alternate extension system, the landing gear could not be deployed. The plane was forced to attempt a belly landing. Second, the deceleration systems, the crucial tools used to slow a massive jet down quickly, were rendered useless. This included the thrust reversers that redirect engine power forward and the wing flaps, which increase drag and lift at slow speeds. The result was an aircraft approaching Muan International Airport at an excessively high speed. A powerless, heavy metal shell with no landing gear and no way to bleed off its kinetic energy. The pilots were left with a nightmare scenario, a glider, dark and heavy, heading for a runway that was suddenly far too short. They had to fly the plane, maintain control, and try to bring it down safely using only basic flight controls, all while knowing their chances were slipping away with every passing second. But it was what they were flying into, the structure beyond the threshold of safety, that would ultimately seal the fate of Flight 2216. The timeline is brutal. The power failed at 8:58:50 a.m. The aircraft, now a silent projectile, continued its descent. The crew, using emergency procedures and raw skill, managed to guide the plane towards the asphalt. They had achieved the impossible, flying a dead plane to the ground. But they were too fast, and they ran out of runway. Instead of gliding onto the grass of the runway and safety area, a designated obstacle-free zone designed to absorb overrun energy, Flight 2216 slammed into the lethal trap, a concrete structure supporting an ILS localizer. The impact was not a gentle slide. It was a catastrophic fragmentation event. The plane hit the rigid obstacle head-on, tearing the fuselage apart. This sequence, the bird strike, the mechanical cascade, the total loss of power, the high-speed approach, and the final impact with an unyielding barrier, is the mechanical truth of the disaster. But as the investigation deepened, the focus shifted from the machines to the men and the institutions that governed them. In any air disaster, the role of the flight crew is scrutinized with clinical intensity. Were their actions the final layer of safety that failed, or were they victims of an impossible situation? In July 2025, the ARIB released its initial findings, and they were explosive. According to the findings, the crash was primarily attributed to an error in the crew's execution of the emergency checklist following the bird strike. When the dual engine failure occurred, the crew was under immense pressure, dealing with a situation few pilots ever face in their careers. In the pandemonium and darkness of the cockpit, the report alleges the crew made a critical mistake. They shut down the functioning left engine by mistake instead of the right engine, which was the one compromised by the bird strike. In a situation where every second counted, where one engine could have provided partial hydraulic pressure or at least residual power, the alleged human error sealed the fate of the plane, guaranteeing the total loss of power and making a controlled glide impossible. This is the most controversial conclusion of the entire investigation. It placed the principal blame squarely on the shoulders of the pilots who perished. The reaction to the ARIB's findings was immediate and fierce. The Jeju Air Pilots Union and the victims' families rose up in a chorus of protest. Their core accusation was simple: the ARIB was engaging in systemic scapegoating. They argued that focusing solely on a checklist error, a mistake made in the split-second panic of an unrecoverable mechanical failure, was a cynical attempt to distract from the larger, far more damning issue: the illegal, immovable concrete barrier that ensured the fatalities. If the pilot error was the cause of the uncontrolled descent, the non-frangible barrier was the cause of the catastrophic fragmentation. The families argued that even with two failed engines, if the plane had landed in a proper, clear runway and safety area, the outcome, while still a crash, would likely have been survivable. Following the sheer volume of protests and public outrage, the scheduled release of the final report was withdrawn. On November 19, 2025, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport announced that the ARIB would hold a public hearing on December 4th and 5th to announce only the interim results, a clear sign that the final findings were still under review due to the intense political and public pressure. The controversy highlights a painful truth in accident investigation. Where does a chain of causality end? Does it end with the physical event, the bird strike, with the pilot's mistake, or with the regulator who allowed a 4-meter concrete obstacle to sit where international law dictated nothing but frangible safety materials should be? For many, the answer was clear. The system itself was the culprit. If the bird strike was the trigger and the pilot error was the misfire, the ILS localizer berm was the loaded gun waiting at the end of the runway. This is the single most damning physical factor in the entire case. What exactly did Flight 2216 crash into? It was a concrete and earthen structure, a supporting barrier for the Instrument Landing System ILS localizer antenna array. This equipment is critical for guiding pilots to the runway in poor visibility. This obstacle stood 4 meters or 13 feet high. Its location was even more critical, 250 meters or 820 feet from the end of the runway. This location places it firmly within the area that, by all international standards, should be designated as the Runway End Safety Area, or RESA. The purpose of the RESA is simple and absolute: to provide an obstacle-free zone to minimize risk of damage to an aircraft that overshoots or undershoots the runway. It is the last chance for a damaged aircraft to slide to a stop with minimal structural failure. The defining characteristic of the Wuhan berm, the one that made it lethal, was its rigidity. It was constructed of concrete and compacted earth, a non-frangible structure. International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, mandates that any obstacles within or near the RESA must be frangible. Frangibility means the structure is designed to break apart upon impact, yielding to the aircraft's mass and energy, thereby preventing catastrophic damage to the fuselage and engines. It's the difference between hitting a brick wall and hitting a papier-mâché screen. South Korean officials initially claimed the runway was built to standard, but the facts speak for themselves. A 4-meter non-frangible concrete obstacle in a required safety zone is a direct violation of international best practices. It was a structural failure that predated the flight by decades. Had the plane encountered only grass or crushable foam, the likelihood of survival for the majority of the 181 souls on board would have been infinitely higher. The berm ensured the opposite. The pressure applied by the tragedy and the clear international violation forced the South Korean government's hand. On January 22, 2025, less than a month after the crash, the government announced sweeping corrective action. They issued an immediate replacement order for concrete navigation barriers at 7 regional airports across the country. At Muan International Airport, the concrete mounds will be removed entirely. The localizer will be reinstalled using the required breakable frangible structures. This action is perhaps the most undeniable proof of the systemic failure. The removal and replacement of obstacles across 7 airports is a national admission of negligence, a silent, expensive acknowledgement that for years these airports had operated with lethal structures guarding the ends of their runways. This was a tragedy that was not just preventable, but one that was built into the very infrastructure of the nation's regional aviation network. The failures extend beyond the concrete of the RESA and the complexity of the cockpit. Muan International Airport itself was a ticking time bomb of operational negligence, particularly regarding the very threat that brought down Flight 221, birds. Data collected prior to the disaster reveals a shocking fact. Muan International Airport held the highest bird strike rate, 0.09%, among South Korea's regional airports. This means the threat was not just known, it was statistically the highest risk factor for Muan's operations. The regulations were clear. A minimum of 4 personnel were required to be on duty for bird mitigation and control. This team uses specialized equipment, flares, noise, and constant monitoring to scare away avian life from flight paths. But on the morning of December 29, 2024, only one person was on duty. A 75% reduction in mandated safety personnel operating at an airport with the nation's highest known risk. This critical lapse in vigilance guaranteed that when the flock of Baikal teal arrived, there was no meaningful defense. It was an invitation to disaster. Following the crash, the emergency response itself drew immediate and intense criticism. The disaster exposed a profound disconnect between national safety procedures and local execution. The Ministry of the Interior and Safety, the national body responsible for disaster management, failed utterly in the immediate aftermath. An emergency text message was finally sent to the public 2 hours and 45 minutes after the disaster. Almost 3 hours after a plane carrying 181 people had crashed and fragmented. Muan County locals were furious at the belatedness of the response. But the adjacent Yongguan County government also drew fire, though for a different reason. Their emergency text messages were criticized for relaying irrelevant information. Instead of standardized disaster and response information, like where to avoid, what roads were closed, or where to go for help, they included messages of condolence and support. In the critical minutes and hours following a catastrophe, the public needs clear, actionable safety information, not emotional platitudes. Both failures highlighted a crisis in communication that was almost as devastating as the physical event itself. The ultimate measure of the disaster is in the lives lost and the trauma inflicted. A total of 179 people were confirmed dead. This includes 175 passengers and 4 of the 6 crew members. Miraculously, 2 flight attendants survived the catastrophic fragmentation. Their survival, amidst the almost total loss of life, is a testament to the random lottery of physics in a crash and provides the only human testimony from inside the final moments of Flight 2216. The nation immediately declared the area a special disaster zone and initiated a period of national mourning until January 5, 2025. The grief was communal. More than 5,500 people volunteered at Muan Airport to assist in the recovery and support efforts, and at least 18,000 people visited a joint memorial altar. The political response was swift. Suspended President Yoon Suk-yeol expressed condolences. On January 7th, both the ruling People Power Party and the opposition Democratic Party agreed to establish a joint special committee to investigate the crash, signaling the seriousness of the systemic issues exposed. And on June 30th, 2025, the Special Act on Relief and Support for Damages from the December 29 passenger plane disaster went into force, a legislative measure designed to provide comprehensive support to the victims' families. The tragedy resonated globally. Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra expressed deep condolences and, importantly, ordered the Thai Foreign Ministry to immediately assist the relatives of Thai crash victims. Condolences were also expressed by world leaders, their respective governments, and the powerful international bodies of the European Union and the United Nations. Even the Boeing company, whose aircraft was involved, offered its sympathies. Accountability, however, was pursued not just by governments, but by victims' families. On October 15, 2025, families of the victims filed a major lawsuit against Boeing in Seattle, Washington. The claim focused on failures in critical landing equipment that, they argued, contributed to the inability to recover the aircraft after the initial engine failures. Simultaneously, the criminal investigation moved forward. On January 2nd, the police initiated search and seizure operations. Jeju Air CEO Kim Il-bai was placed under an overseas travel ban. But perhaps the most heartbreaking individual consequence occurred on January 21, 2025. Son Chang-won, the former president of the Korea Airports Corporation, who oversaw the facility upgrade that included the controversial concrete barriers, was found dead from a presumed suicide. It was a tragic, final illustration of the heavy, unbearable burden of guilt and accountability the disaster laid upon individuals within the compromised system. The fallout was not limited to courts and political committees. It reshaped the commercial landscape of South Korean low-cost carriers. Jeju Air immediately went into crisis mode. Their website temporarily removed links to purchase tickets. The CEO and the chair of the parent company issued apologies. Over 260 employees were deployed to Muon to assist families. But the public's loss of confidence was instant and severe. Data showed that Jeju Air experienced a 26.8% decline in its number of passengers in the week following the crash. By December 30th, the airline recorded 67,000 cancellations, leading to a later announcement of a 10 to 15% reduction in flights for the upcoming winter season. The consequences were devastating and immediate. The government responded to the systemic failures with sweeping regulatory changes that targeted the entire low-cost carrier, or LCC sector. On January 23, 2025, the government announced it would tighten regulations on LCCs and, crucially, increase penalties for airlines that fail to meet enhanced operational safety standards. By April 2025, a new comprehensive set of safety measures was announced. These included new penalties specifically directed against airlines for fatal crashes, the creation of new rules on the location and frangibility of localizer equipment, a direct response to the Mumbai tragedy, mandates for longer runways and the installation of arrestor systems, engineered materials designed to stop overrunning aircraft for shorter runways, increased personnel and monitoring systems for bird strike avoidance, including a larger radius for prohibiting land uses that can attract birds near airports, significantly increased maintenance and technician qualification requirements, and finally, increased training requirements for flight crews and specific measures to reduce pilot fatigue. The loss of Flight 2216 became the painful catalyst for a total reevaluation of safety protocols, from the cockpit to the concrete surrounding the runway. The case file for Jeju Air Flight 2216 is one of the most complex and tragic in recent memory. It is a mosaic of failure, where multiple, distinct threads of negligence converged on a single morning. It was a failure of environmental defense, where an airport with the highest bird strike risk failed to staff its mitigation teams. It was a failure of engineering compliance, where an unyielding, non-frangible concrete obstacle was allowed to stand in a designated safety area in direct violation of ICAO mandates. It was a failure of emergency communication, where the bureaucratic response lagged behind the human need for information by almost 3 hours. And it was the tragic failure of human response in the cockpit, where, under the impossible pressure of total electrical failure, a critical emergency procedure was allegedly mishandled. The disaster of Flight 2216 teaches us that aviation safety is not an abstract concept. It is the sum of countless small details: the staffing levels of a bird patrol, the composition of a concrete mound, the clarity of a checklist, and the speed of a text message. When the system is operating perfectly, all those details are invisible. But when the system fails, every flaw is magnified into a catastrophe. The 179 lives lost on December 29, 2024, now serve as a permanent, painful lesson, a reminder that in the unforgiving world of aviation, safety must be proactive, absolute, and never, ever compromised. Thank you for joining us on the Case Files. We hope this detailed breakdown provides clarity and context to this heartbreaking disaster. If you'd like to dive deeper into the technical findings of the ARIB or track the ongoing lawsuit against Boeing, please find the links and sources in the description below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next case file. Hey there! Before you take off, we'd just like to take a second and say that we really appreciate you sticking around to the end of the video. Katie and I are so grateful for the incredible Case Files community, so thank you for being a part of it. If you want to help the Case Files continue to grow, one of the easiest things you can do is leave a like on this video and consider subscribing. Be sure to hit that notification bell as well and select all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. We want you to know that we truly appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much, and we hope to see you soon.